Brecka, our friend.
Yeah, Gary. I love Gary, by the way.
I love Gary, yeah.
My name is Gary Brecka. I'm a human biologist, researcher, and a biohacker. For 20 years, I spent my lifetime working in the insurance industry predicting mortality to the month, which meant if I got 5 years of medical records and 5 years of demographic data, the team that I was associated with could actually tell an insurance company how long you had to live to the month. After years and years of this type of research and analysis, I realized one thing. There were human beings on the other side of the spreadsheets that I was working on, and that I didn't want to spend another day of my lifetime predicting how long people were going to live. And I wanted to help them live happier, healthier, more fulfilling lives. You see, we were put on this earth to thrive. God gave us everything that we need in order to manifest our destiny and thrive. Clean, clear, cognitive energy. The waking energy of a tiger.
This guy's incredible. He's amazing.
Really?
Yeah, and this guy can come in and literally change your life.
And if we want optimal health, we have to educate ourselves and go out and find ways to go inside of our bodies, find the missing raw material that's keeping us from being the absolute best, replace that raw material, and then thrive. And today, I am so blessed to share my journey and all of my research with all of you.
Whoa! Wow! Dude, it's so good to see so many faces. Wow, thank you guys. My name is Gary Brecka. I'm a human biologist, a researcher, and a former insurance mortality expert. For those of you that don't know me or my background, I spent 22 years of my life studying mortality for large life insurance companies, which meant that if we got 10 years of demographic data on you and 10 years of medical records, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And I get so much flack for that. If you see me on podcasts, I get challenged about it. People say, well, if you could predict life or death to the month, you'd be Jesus, or you would have won a Nobel Prize. But the truth is, it wasn't my science, it wasn't my data, but it is some of the most accurate data in the world. You see, life insurance companies have data that no other financial services enterprise has, no collegiate university has, not even the federal government has, because life insurance companies know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 370 million lives. They are the only institution on the planet that will take $50 million or $100 million worth of risk on one variable. One. How many more months does that person have left on earth? And every year, if you want to know how accurate they are at predicting death, just look at what happened in the 2008-2009 financial services crisis. We had 364 banks fail. We had 0 life insurance companies fail. If that database that I had access to for 22 years could see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity. It would upend modern medicine in a way that would be catastrophic, because they have data, and they have data on what causes human beings to leave this earth. And so for 22 years, I worked in this space, and I believed that this was just data. And I was fascinated by the data, and I was excited about all of the data. But the truth is, I began to realize that there were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. And so I made a conscious decision one day that I wasn't going to spend another minute of my life predicting death. I was going to spend the balance of my lifetime helping people live healthier, happier, longer lives. And that's what we're here to do. And thank you. I always make 2 bold promises. I get in trouble a lot for one of them, but I make 2 bold promises every time I take the stage. Number one, this is one of the mortality predictions that I used to do. I just look at these once in a while and to remind myself of what I do not ever want to do again. Because, this career, it felt like I was sitting behind a thick glass wall, just watching blind people walk into traffic. And after 22 years, we realized that the number one reason why most people are not living the healthiest, happiest, longest life that they could is what we called scientifically modifiable risk factors, right? Had I been able to just pick up the phone and contact that person, contact that patient, and give them a tip, I could have on average extended their life 7 years. And that is a material fact, because most of the modifiable risk factors that we deal with that are modifiable, that are easy to change, lifestyle changes, things like going back to the basics, which I'm going to talk about today, supplementing for deficiency, not just the sake of supplementing, would add 7 years to the lifespan of every person in this room. Not just your lifespan, but your health span. And that is also a material fact. So every chance that I get, I say this quote. You might have heard me say this before. I don't believe that you will hear another sentence that is so profound or will have more impact on how many years you have left on this planet, or the quality of your life, the depth of your sleep, your waking energy, your cognitive function, your hormone balance, other than that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. I was actually talking to a cardiothoracic surgeon in the back before I got on this stage, and I actually was talking about something we developed, and I didn't plan to speak on this, but I'm going to mention it now. We were talking about something we developed in the mortality space called a hypoxic curve. You see, as you deplete oxygen in the human body, which happens over a prolonged period of time, right? By the way, does anyone know what the actual definition of death is? You know that all human beings die of exactly the same thing, right? What is the definition of death? Hypoxia. Lack of oxygen to the brain. When you can no longer sustain brain function, that's when you pass. Right now, it may be a gunshot wound, a heart attack, a bus, a stroke. We tend to think of it as an event. But what I'm here to promise you is that it's not an event. It is a slow, gradual, predictive curve. And so what we would do is we would look at the status that a human being was in, and then we would use other markers in their blood to predict how soon would the onset of disease set in, what would the severity of that disease be, and how quickly would they succumb to it. And the number one factor we used was something called a hypoxic curve, which is a simple way of saying how well is your body using oxygen. You know, you've heard that sitting is the new smoking, right? Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. But why? Why is just being sedentary, not doing anything, cause you to die early, right? Because one of the things that happens is your respiratory volume goes down. And as your respiratory volume drops, you bring less oxygen into the body. You stop breathing with the lobes of your lungs. You start breathing with the apex of your lungs. As your posture changes and your shoulders come forward and your rib cage collapses, and you lose the capacity to use what's called auxiliary muscles of respiration, which 95% of you after age 35 will not use. 95% of you after your 35th birthday will never sprint again. So we don't respire and use these auxiliary muscles of respiration. As we sort of collapse into an aged posture, we breathe more carbon dioxide, less oxygen, and it has a material impact on the trajectory of our life. The same thing happens with hormone balance. I talked to hormone therapy clinics here, and they didn't even realize that they're actually treating oxygen management. Because when our hormones are low, especially in men and women, testosterone, for example, just to pick one. I didn't plan to talk about this, but I'm going to mention it. For those of you that are in the hormone space, when that hormone gets low, we have a tendency to think that testosterone is a male hormone responsible for male characteristics. You know, facial hair, muscles, aggression, things like that. It's not. The primary role of that hormone is to actually put pressure on your bone marrow to create new red blood cells. It's called erythropoiesis. So one of the ways that we would put you on a hypoxic curve is we would look at your hormone balance, and we would see if you were deficient in certain hormones, men in free testosterone, women in total in free testosterone. And based on that, we would give you more or less of a chance of making it out of your hypoxic condition. So if you are in a prolonged state of deficient hormones, and your doctor had seen these on your panel and done nothing about it, we would reduce your chance of ever fixing your hormone problem, and we would increase the probability that a disease with onset in your life earlier than required, it would be more severe than it had to be, and you would succumb to it sooner. So when we talk about biooptimization, which I hope is what we're all here for, we're talking about how do we find the optimal levels in the human body, restore optimal levels to the human body so that human beings can thrive. That is just one of the ways that we did it, because when those hormones would go down, the bone marrow wouldn't make enough red blood cells, wouldn't make enough hemoglobin, which is your oxygen transport. And your doctor would look at your panel and say, oh, your CBC, your complete blood count is normal. Your blood cell count's in the normal range. Your hemoglobin's in the normal range. Your hormones are in the normal range. But what was happening was you were becoming progressively more hypoxic. So I commend all of you, because this is the new revolution, right? It is not up to them. It is up to us. We need to build an army of citizen scientists, right? I mean, our job is not to impress each other with how smart we are. Our job is to educate people enough to inspire them to make a transformation. You know, because if we don't inspire someone to change something in their life, then what we're doing is meaningless. You know, in my industry, I find that a lot of super woke biohackers spend time talking to super woke biohackers, right? It's about how can I impress you with how smart I am. I don't feel like that's my job, and it shouldn't be our job as a community of people that are interested in biooptimization. Our job is to find the masses and teach them the simplicity in finding an optimal health route to stay out of the system. Okay, so that's what we're gonna try to do today. I make a bold promise from the stage every time I'm here that if you do what I'm gonna ask you to do today, statistically, this is valid, it will add 7 years to the health span of your lifetime and 7 years to your lifespan. You know, it's so interesting in the United States, we should be the oldest, most centenarian populated population in the world, right? Because we spend more on healthcare than the next 7 countries combined, $4 trillion. We're ranked 32nd in the world on healthcare delivery. We're now ranked 59th in the world in life expectancy. We are the only civilized nation in the world whose life expectancy is going backwards. So we have to understand that the answer is not in chemicals or synthetics or in pharmaceuticals. The answer is in enhancing what God gave us, right? And so you guys want to go on that journey with me right now? All right, awesome. And so my second promise, and I'll try to have time to do this, is that one of the things that we learned in the mortality space by studying hundreds and hundreds of millions of lives is that very often these diseases and pathologies and these things in life that we call consequences of aging, weight gain, water retention, poor sleep, poor focus and concentration, lack of waking energy, hormone imbalance, you know, sexual dysfunction, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, all of these conditions that we think are happening to us are actually happening within us. The majority of these conditions are because of nutrient deficiencies in the human body. And if we can go and find the missing raw material and put it back, these people will thrive. Human beings were meant to thrive. We need 91 essential minerals, we need 3 essential fatty acids, we need 8 essential amino acids. 70% of you are missing some or several of those, which means already your baseline is not taken care of, and you're seeing the expression of disease. And then we go chasing the fun things, the NMNs and the nicotinamide ribosides and this IV and this rare resveratrol and this other supplement and this other supplement and all of these specialty items when we're not just watering the soil, we're not just fixing the basics. That's where all human beings need to start. 91 minerals, 3 essential fatty acids, 8 essential amino acids, which by the way are not proteins. I had a debate with somebody in the back there. It's like, it's 8 essential proteins. I go, amino acids are not proteins. They are the building blocks of proteins. When you are taking in protein, whey protein, chicken, fish, meat, and you're eating that protein thinking it's feeding your muscle, it's not. Your body has to take that protein, dismantle it, then send the dismantled amino acids back to the muscle to build a muscle. So why wouldn't we just give our body the amino acids instead of making it chop it up from taking in proteins? So I'm gonna come back to that in a second. But one of my bold promises is that at the end, and I'll try to open it up from questions, is that I will take any ailment that you or a loved one suffers from, whether it's an autoimmune condition or whether it's a cardiac condition or whether it's what we would call psychiatric conditions, which I don't think that we have a mental illness crisis in this country. I think we have a lack of mental fitness. And I will tell you what I believe to be the missing raw material that has gone from that person's body that could possibly be leading to that condition. You see, you may have heard me say this before, but when I was in grad school, I always tell the story of, I was actually getting my second human biology degree, and I wanted to study humans, and I had to take all these damn plant botany courses. You have to learn about algae, and there's a class called morphology of thallophytes, and if any of you even know what that class is, you are a terrible geek. But you have to take all these plant biology classes, but the thing that stood out to me the most was that if let's say you have a palm tree, and you have a leaf rotting in the palm tree, and you call a true arborist, a true botanist out to your house, and he sees that the leaf is rotting, you know what he'll do? He'll core test the soil, right? He won't touch the leaf. He won't poison it. He won't scrape it. He will not cut it off. He will core test the soil. And then he'll say, you know what? There's no nitrogen in the soil. And you add nitrogen and the leaf heals. Human beings are no different. We've just forgotten. We've given up on humanity and mankind. The ability of this to heal this, and the capacity to put raw materials back into the human body so that it can operate properly. And we saw this over and over and over and over in the mortality space. The number 3 killer of human beings in America. Anybody know? The number 3 killer of human beings in America. Don't say doctors, because there's a lot of doctors in here and I don't consider them all murderers. No, check them for weapons. It's not actually doctors, it's medical error. Only cardiovascular disease and cancer kill more people than modern medical error. And that does not mean that doctors are out to kill us. What it means is that the system is broken, right? We go to chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals before we go to biooptimization. So it is the 3rd leading cause of death. But in my industry, we would see simple misses in the human body go on to cause people to live considerably shorter lives. And I'll give you one of those right now. It's vitamin D3. The single most important nutrient in the human body, the only vitamin that a human being makes on our own, cholecalciferol, we make it from sunlight and cholesterol. I would see D3 deficient patients for years and years and years and years, decades of low vitamin D3, I'm just giving you this one nutrient example, go into their primary care physician's office. Do you know that once you've been deficient in D3 long enough, you will present with rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms? You do not have rheumatoid arthritis. You have the same symptoms of it. You might not have the SED rates and the RI factors, but you go in, and when you describe how you feel to the wrong physician, my soles of my feet are sore and achy when I get out of bed in the morning. It's hard for me to make a fist. I got tension across the backs of my shoulders, my knees, and my hips ache, and they click. And they say, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. Let me tell you how many times I saw this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put you on something called prednisone for a short period of time. Then I'm going to switch you to something called a corticosteroid. And they would put you on a steroid, which is something that actually just, is supposed to reduce inflammation. Well, we knew in the mortality space, because we had data, that if you start a corticosteroid, you had exactly 6 years and 1 day until you were having a joint replacement. Because first, those pharmaceuticals act like anti-inflammatories, but eventually they eat the joint like a termite. And so it was so accurate that if you were a 60-year-old female and I saw you were misdiagnosed with rheumatoid, I would advance your age 6 years and 1 day. I would schedule a joint replacement for you, and I would begin to reduce something called your ambulatory profile, how well you ambulate, how well you move. And as you reduce mobility in a mortality model, you can bring in the diseases that exacerbate with reduced mobility. And then we could predict the onset of, the severity of, and how quickly you would succumb to this. Again, I'm not saying that physicians are out to kill us, but modern medicine is so overburdened that very often they would mistake a nutrient deficiency for a disease. And if you think about what happened to this person, they were diagnosed with a condition they didn't have, put on a medication that wasn't required, which led to a surgery that wasn't unnecessary, which brought pathologies from their future into their present, and they succumbed to a condition they never should have had. So we're going to go back and talk about how do we get to the soil? How do we get to the basics? I always talk about genetic testing. I will say you do not have to do the genetic testing through me. I am not up here to sell you a genetic test. My company sells one. There are lots of great genetic testing companies, but if you are in this audience right now and you haven't done a basic methylation test, write this down. a genetic methylation test. Our body 300 billion times every day, there it is. Can you see it? Guys see that? There's gonna be a quiz on this later. Believe it or not, I've actually committed that entire chart to memory. But 300 billion times a day, our body goes through this process called methylation, which is how we take raw materials that enter our body, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, nutrients, and we convert them to the usable form. It is hard to believe that so much mental illness, so many behavioral disturbances, so much weight gain, water retention, so much poor sleep, so much lack of focus and concentration, so much poor response to exercise, so much hormone imbalance could simply be related to whether or not your body can take a raw material that you give it and convert it into the usable form. Right? I mean, there's an OBGYN. There's a couple OBGYNs in the audience. There's one right here. So I was having a conversation with him forward. So he's in obstetrics and gynecology. OBGYNs will tell you, what's the first thing we tell women that get pregnant as soon as they get pregnant? We tell, well, not anymore, you don't, but we tell them to take high doses of folic acid. Right? We're like, well, that's a natural vitamin. It's vitamin B9. It's actually not. Folic acid is a man-made chemical. You know that folic acid didn't exist until 1993. You can't find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. Folic acid does not exist anywhere naturally in nature. You will never convince me that something that we make in a laboratory that wasn't even around 50 years ago is somehow essential to optimal health. But it's in everything now. It's in our food supply. It's in all fortified or enriched foods. I preach about this all the time. If you followed me on Instagram or listened to my stage talks, I talk about getting fortified or enriched foods out of your diet. When we give this stuff to pregnant women, 44% of them have a gene mutation that doesn't allow them to convert this folic acid synthetic chemical into the active form that our body needs. Well, what happens when you have a deficiency in something like methylfolate? Well, if you understand how mood and emotion works and how the gut can actually have a direct impact on your psychiatric condition, begin to understand that neurotransmitters, which form the basis of all mood, every emotional state that you can experience, is a collection of neurotransmitters. It's like a recipe, right? Just like a chef puts a recipe together to make a recipe, we do the same thing in the brain to create emotion. Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, ephedrine, dopamine. These combine to either create mood or emotion or to drive behavior. When you start to pull these neurotransmitters out of the brain, when you start to decrease the production of them in your gut, you get what we call mood disorders and psychiatric disease. For decades, we called depression an inadequate supply of serotonin. But never did we have a medication that raised serotonin. We said, if you're low on serotonin, you're by definition depressed. So we're gonna put you on something like an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, that rations what little serotonin you have. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by its own definition, it never ended depression, which is why when we started this company, and we would have hundreds of patients come in and we would say, how long have you been on an antidepressant? People say 15 years, 18 years. I was always like, when did you think it was gonna kick in, right? But if you get back to the basics and you understand that, serotonin, this neurotransmitter that drives mood and drives emotion, actually comes from an amino acid. We take a simple amino acid called tryptophan, the one everybody knows makes you sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner. The body methylates this into a neurotransmitter called serotonin, 90% of which is in your gut. If you don't have serotonin here, you can't have serotonin here. This is why depression rarely begins out here. It almost always begins right here. If I could magically go into anyone's body right now, stick a needle in and draw out the serotonin, you would instantly become depressed. There is nothing wrong with you. You are deficient in a raw material. And the same thing happens with dopamine. In the mortality space, we knew that the absence of dopamine was the presence of addiction. We knew that deficiencies in metabolizing that neurotransmitter, that fast metabolizers of dopamine, people that had a genetic propensity to break that neurotransmitter down quickly so that that neurotransmitter was very, very low, had a very high propensity for addiction. And if they were addicted, we would never give them a chance to make it out of the addiction. We would only account in our mortality model for the addiction to shift, right? Because the absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. If you've actually ever been an addict or you've ever known a true addict, their addiction has a tendency to shift, right? Sex addicts become alcoholics, alcoholics become drug addicts become workaholics become workoutaholics. Why do they still have an addictive tendency? Because you never address the dopamine. How do you address the dopamine? You put the raw materials, vitamins, minerals, amino acids back into their body so they can make those neurotransmitters in their gut so they can travel up the vagus nerve and create that mood and create that emotional state. I've told thousands of mothers and fathers, if you have a child that can wake up first thing in the morning and sit and play video games for 12 or 14 hours a day. I'm not talking about a kid that likes video games. I am talking about a child that will sit in front of a TV and play video games for 12 or 14 hours a day. I will show you a future addict. Because that genetic deficiency starts when they are born. You can treat this with methylated vitamins. Why do they have will I tell you that is a future addict? Because that kid is not playing the video game because he likes the video game. He's playing the video game because it makes him feel normal. The dopamine ding makes him feel normal. Try to take the controller away from a child like that and watch how they go DEFCON 9. You wonder why sometimes our kids wake up normal in the morning. We feed them breakfast laden with folic acid, and then it is a full contact sport to get them in the car to go to school in the morning. And then they get to school and the school calls and says, little Johnny can't pay attention. He's disruptive. He doesn't finish his assignments. He's got ADD or ADHD or OCD, and we need to bring in the Ritalin to solve this. You know, modern medicine says if the child's mind is racing, right? If their thoughts are just racing, then let's put an amphetamine into the body. Let's race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. By the way, that's what Vyvanse, Ritalin, Adderall, they're amphetamines, right? They take the system that's not broken, central nervous system, and try to match it to the system that is broken, the active mind. So let's take a system that's not busted, break it so it works with the broken system, right? But if we think about, how many of you know some, by the way, I need to get off of this slide. This is giving me nausea. But if I was able to expand that, it actually says ADD, ADHD. If I was able to expand this, what you would find in this myriad soup of what looks like nonsense are very simple nutrients that are being used over and over and over in our bodies. Methylfolate, the complex of B vitamins, a specific form of B12 called methylcobalamin, and amino acids like L-methionine and SAMe. And if you were able to expand this drawing and you were able to say, what would happen if I just took a B vitamin, B12, and I snatched it out of that drawing? How many of those circles would collapse? Dozens of them. And what do those circles mean? They mean the creation of neurotransmitters, which create mood. They mean the creation of amino acids, which are not just the building blocks of proteins, they're the building blocks of all of our structural tissue. Our immune system is made out of amino acids. We think about amino acids for athletes, but we don't think about amino acids for immunosuppressed patients. We don't think about amino acids for people that are just sick, that they could be sick and their immune system be dysfunctional because it's just simply missing amino acids. But I am here to tell you that is a fact. So if we would take humanity back to the basics, sunlight, grounding, breath work, cold showers, basic nutrition, whole foods, you would see an entire class of systemic disease disappear, right? Woo! All right. I'm glad I got a woo on that one. I'm telling you, we don't fix the food supply, we'll never fix chronic disease, you know. I already have big pharma after me. I don't need the food industry after me too, so I'll just leave those guys alone. I don't know if you saw, but I got actually heavily censored by the Canola Oil Society of Canada. They try to, yeah, woo! Yes, put our hands together for the Canola Oil Society of Canada. If you're here, love you guys. You're killing the world. I didn't even know that there was a Canola Oil Society of Canada until I did a speech on the dangers of seed oils, and then they came after me with a vengeance, and they were like, the canola oil is not bad for you. I said, listen, I never said canola oil is bad for you, nor did I say peanut oil is bad for you. What I said was industrial processed seed oils are bad for you. If you take a canola plant, Canola Oil Society, and you stick it in a commercial press, and it comes out gummy, and then you degum it with hexane, which is a neurotoxin, and then you take that neurotoxic degummed oil and you heat it to 405 degrees, so it's rancid and putrefied, and then you take that putrefied, rancid seed oil and you deodorize it with sodium hydroxide, a known carcinogen, and then you bleach it and bottle it and put it on the shelf. That's toxic. And if you want to come on the stage and have a debate, I'm happy to talk about it, right? But instead, they just banned me. 200 physicians signed a petition to permanently ban me from social media because I said seed oils are toxic. I said industrial processed seed oils are toxic, and they are. That's, by the way, one of the things you should get out of your diet.